The Precision Trolling Data phone app is a troller's best friend. Imagine knowing how deep hundreds of different crankbaits and other trolling hardware will dive based on lead length, line diameter, and trolling speed. Mark and Jake Romanack are also the guys behind the Precision Trolling Data phone app. The data contained in the PTD app is collected on the water using scuba gear to physically observe and confirm the diving depths. Trollers can literally aim their lures at fish they mark on sonar. The PTD app almost makes trolling unfair when it comes to catching more and bigger fish.
Well, good morning and welcome to beautiful Higgins Lake in northern Michigan. The goal today is to do a little precision trolling data testing. It's a business that's been around since the early 90s. Essentially what we do is we test trolling hardware, crankbaits and other types of gear that people typically put in the water. And our goal is to be able to tell people how deep their gear is running. We always remind people that if you don't know where your gear is running in the water column, you're fishing blind. And with precision trolling, we can tell you exactly where your gear is in the water column, and that's going to make you a better fisherman. We got a diver.
16.3, 197, 163,
16.3, 29 foot 7 inches.
The logical place to start when we start talking about precision trolling is maybe a little bit about the history of the company. Back in the early 90s, the concept came to us that what we could do is if we could control the variables associated with trolling, things like lead length, line diameter, line type, and even trolling speed. If you could control all those variables, then you could predict accurately where your gear would be running in the water. The question is, how do you know how deep it's running in the water? And what we do is we use actual scuba gear, put a diver in the water and send a diver down to physically look at the lure as it's going past a tape measure and to confirm its exact depth. So we know exactly how deep the lure is running at specific lead lengths, specific line diameters, and also specific trolling speeds. And when you take all that data and collect it together, you can create what we call a dive curve. And essentially a dive curve is showing the path that the lure runs in the water as you increase the lead length. Knowing that data, we can put our lure anywhere in the water column that we want to, and that is a very powerful tool. When you have that knowledge, you have the knowledge of being able to put your gear specifically on the fish.
One of the things that we found is we've absolutely played with live sonar for testing, but personally I don't feel like we can get as accurate of data as we do with a physical diver in the water. And what I mean by that is we can use live to give us an idea of where that lure is in the water column, plus or minus probably 5 feet. But in the big scheme, I can get right down to an inch with a physical diver in the water. And to me, that is what precision trolling is. It's about being as accurate as humanly possible. Now we utilize live sonar for multiple things. One of the things that we do is it'll actually tell me where the diver is in the water column, knowing how deep that lure is. Now if you know anything about diving, you know it takes a while for a diver to come up from depth. But one thing we do use live for is being able to see when that diver goes by the lure, so then we can make our adjustments and start to make the turn. So technology in that aspect has absolutely helped us. But as far as using live sonar to bring you guys data, I just don't feel like it's there yet. Now technology is always advancing and it absolutely might be there someday, but right now it gives us a baseline of where that lure is in the water column. It lets us know when the diver has gone by the bait, and then that's the tool. Now in this case we're using the LVS 62 transducer, which is the highest end, best quality live sonar on the market to date through Garmin. But right now it's still hard to beat the good old-fashioned diver giving us the data.
Fishing 411 TV is brought to you in part by the Ultimate Sports Show Tour. Fishing 411 TV is brought to you in part by Fishhawk Electronics. Going fishing without a fishhawk is called boating.
So you can clearly see Morris coming down on the water column. That's our diver. You can clearly see this is the tadpole that we're using right now to get our lure down to depth. And then an additional 50 feet, here's our crankbait right here. So you can see that this 62 transducer has a lot of power, and I'm running it in a manner right now where it's actually slow. That's why you got this vapor trail from Morris, all the bubbles. But as he's going down, he went past the tadpole. He's coming down, coming down, coming down, and he's gonna get to this lure right here. Now one of the things that I mean by accuracy is you can actually see that lure is from here to here. So I know that he's gonna be in that zone of, in that 40 to 50 foot zone. But what I don't know is what accuracy. That's the cool thing about spot testing with live sonar and then utilizing the tape measure and the diver to get us the exact number. So he's gonna come up and he's gonna give me a number right to the inch of where that lure was in the water column.
164, 292.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the variables associated with trolling. The number one variable we're concerned about is lead length, and everybody knows that short lead, a lure is not going to dive very deep, but then as you increase that length of the leader, you increase the diving depth of the lure. So trolling lead is very important, so we're going to control that factor extremely carefully, and we use line counter reels so we know exactly how much line we're letting out, and we actually take it to another step. We take our line counter reels and we calibrate them so that when we let 100 foot of line out, it's going to say exactly 100 foot on the line counter. And that's something that doesn't naturally happen. Calibrating is putting just the right amount of line on the reel, that the reel is calibrated for that line diameter. And what a lot of people simply don't understand about line counter reels is they're calibrated for one line diameter. But fishermen use all different kinds of line diameters. And in fact, we're using 10-pound test as our baseline line, and most line counters are actually calibrated with 20-pound test lines. So that calibration process takes us a little bit of time, but it's something that's very important to making sure your line counter is giving you real information, not fictitious information. The next variable that we're very concerned about is something called line diameter. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. The thinner a line is, the less friction there's associated with trolling, and so that lure is naturally going to go deeper. But as you go up in line diameter, that friction increases, and as that friction increases, of course, the lure can't overcome the friction and it doesn't dive as deeply. So we have two baseline data points that we stick with. We do a 10-pound monofilament, which is approximately 14 thousandths of diameter, and then we do a 10-4 fire line or braided fuse line. And those two lines give us a really good separation. The thin line goes much deeper, the thicker line doesn't go as deep. We also test with other line diameters. For example, if it's a salmon style lure, we'd typically be using a 20-pound test monofilament because that's more appropriate to what a salmon fisherman would use compared to what a walleye fisherman would use.
Another advancement in technology that we've made over the years with precision trolling is all the way down to our gasoline kicker motor. Now, kicker motors have been around forever, but when this company was originated, when it started, we were using two-stroke, carbureted kicker motors. And your speed is so important when you're doing speed testing like we're doing right now. And so it was hard to keep a very accurate speed, but now you team it up with the technology of a 4-stroke EFI kicker motor teamed up with a digital throttle like this iTroll system that I have right here. I can very accurately keep my speed in a very tight zone. And what's nice about this iTroll system is I can simply just turn this dial up or down if I need to keep my speed slower or faster, and allows for extremely accurate speed data. Now we team that up with perfect conditions. We do testing when it's very calm out so we can keep our speeds right in that zone where they need to be. If it's windy, then obviously our speeds will fluctuate and our data will reflect that. And so it's very important to have calm days, but when you can team up technology with a digital system like this iTroll, you can really get accurate speed data for precision trolling data.
You know, when we first started with precision trolling data, the motivation was we were all tournament professionals and we were targeting walleyes, and so we wanted to know what our gear would do for walleye fishing. But as we've evolved in our careers, we now fish for a wider variety of species, and so precision trolling data started with the idea of data for walleye fishing, but now it has expanded to cover pretty much all aspects of trolling. Great Lakes trout and salmon, walleye, stripers, pike, muskie, you name it, we've got stuff tested that would be appropriate for those styles of fishing. So it really doesn't matter what species you troll for, we probably have data that's going to interest you. Even panfish, believe it or not, we've actually even tested little tiny things like jigs to find out how deep they would go for crappie trolling.
Fishing 411 TV is brought to you in part by Abyss Battery. Power your pursuit. Fishing 411 TV is brought to you in part by Big Bite Baits and Steel Shad Premier Fishing Lures. Smokercraft Incorporated and Suzuki Outboards presents the 411 on Fishing.
You know, whenever we're out trolling, a lot of times what I like to do is something that we call two-motor trolling, where basically we're using our electric motor as our navigation, right? And we're using our kicker motor as our power. And that's exactly what we're doing today. So right now I have my kicker motor, my Suzuki kicker in the water, and that's doing the majority of the pushing for us. So let's say we're trying to stay in that 1.5 mile an hour range. So I would have that kicker motor pushing the boat at about 1 mile an hour, right? So the majority of the work is done with that gasoline kicker motor. But up on the bow, we have an autopilot electric motor. We have a Garmin Kraken, a Force Kraken up on the bow. There's a lot of different styles of autopilot style motors out there. But one of the nice things about that autopilot motor is it keeps the boat going straight, and that can kind of be hands-free. And what you'll see a lot when we're on the episode is I'll reach down and I'll make adjustments using this key fob that I have right here. And what I'm doing is I'm steering with the electric motor, and I'm using this key fob to do that. If I need to turn a little bit right or a little bit left, I can do that simply by using the key fob. So the kicker motor is giving us that power, that push. The electric motor is keeping the boat going straight in one direction, and that combination allows us to fish for days and not have to worry about plugging in the boat. In a situation like this, I have lithium batteries in the boat, I have a brushless electric motor, and after a whole day of fishing, I'm really only using about 20% of the power, so I can get multiple days of fishing with this system that I have right here.
The precision trolling data was originally published and offered in a book, but that was many years ago. These days we publish our data in an app, and you can find that app either at the Google Play Store or you can also find it at the Apple App Store. So whether you have an Android or an Apple phone, doesn't matter. And you can go online and you can order whatever information you want. You can order individual lure data if you want, if you just want to go easy at it and just try a couple lures and see how it works for you. Or you can buy all of our data, something called the lifetime version. If you buy the lifetime package, what's happening is you get all of our data that we've tested to date, which is literally thousands of dive curves, and then any data we test in the future, you also get that at no additional cost. So there's lots of different ways you can go about it, but once you purchase the data, you own it, it stays on your phone. The only thing we can't do is you can't transfer from one phone platform to another. In other words, if you start with Android, you can't switch to iPhone. If you start with iPhone, you can't switch to Android, but that's the same with all paid apps.
You know, one of the things that I think is overlooked a lot when it comes to open water trolling is how important your electronics are. If you're not marking fish, you're not seeing fish, you're wasting a lot of time, especially in the fall because we're trolling extremely slow. When you troll slow, that means you're not covering a lot of water. And so it's important to drive around and look for these suspended fish. Now, one of the things that my electronics did in this case is I was actually looking at my graph and I saw some fish that were high up in the water column. and I noticed that I didn't really have anything up that high as far as lures up that high in the water column. So I reeled in a line, put a 45-foot lead, which is the highest lead that I would have, sent it out to the side, and it wasn't very long and it went back. So again, that's just paying attention to my electronics. I was staring at that screen, I saw that there was fish higher up in the water column, and I adjusted. That is what trolling is all about. So many times I hear guys tell me, well, I don't like to troll because it's boring. If you consider it boring, I'm telling you, you're doing it wrong. There's so many different pieces of that puzzle. That's what trolling is, putting all those pieces together to create a pattern at the end of the day. And it's an ever-changing pattern. If you're going to sit there all day in a chair, trolling can get pretty boring. But if you get up on your feet and you work your gear, you're going to catch a lot more fish, and you're going to find out that there's a lot of pieces of this puzzle. A little bit better grade of fish here, Dad. Looks like a good fish.
All right. That is a good fish. Keep them coming just like you got there, Jakers, and we'll see what we can do here.
Slow and steady, just like this. Keep them coming.
Perfect.
Nice.
I don't get no better than that. Man, that's a nice fish. Woo! You got a dandy there, son.
That is a really, really good Lake Erie walleye. You know, another thing I was talking about, putting a pattern together. For me, when it comes to crankbait trolling, I really look at all the small details of putting that pattern together. And one of the things I look at is how a fish is biting that crankbait. If the fish is coming to the back of the boat and they're hooked on that back hook and they look like they're barely hooked, you know, it's good, we're still catching fish, but there's something we're missing. Maybe it's the color, maybe it's the speed, maybe it's the action of the crankbait. But when you start seeing fish come to the back of the boat and they're hooked like that right there, literally on that front hook, that fish T-boned that bait. I fooled that fish 100%, and that's what I'm looking for. So there's a lot of those small details that you can really put together to have a better day. Maybe you're barely catching those fish and they're coming off at the back of the boat. You change out colors, you change out crankbaits, you change your speed, something a little bit different, and all of a sudden these fish start T-boning it like this one did right here, and those fish are not coming undone.
Fishing 411 TV is brought to you in part by Cisco Fishing Systems, your fishing equipment experts. Fishing 411 TV is brought to you in part by ProCure, ruthlessly effective bait scents.
You might hear in the background, you can hear our kicker motor, so we're going at a faster rate of speed than we were before. So when it comes to speed, people think that it has a profound impact on how deep things dive, and the answer is yes and no. It really depends on what you're trolling. If you're trolling a floating device like a typical crankbait, it's not going to impact how deep that lure goes. Speed doesn't influence the diving depth of a floating crankbait. But if you're talking about something that sinks, like you're fishing a crankbait with a snap weight or maybe a dipsy diver or lead core line, speed has a profound impact on how deep that goes. The slower you go, the deeper it is. The faster you go, the shallower it runs. And so we reference speed where speed is important. Certain devices it's not important, so we don't reference it. And other devices it is important, and so we do reference it. So you'll see right on the app whether a device is speed sensitive or not. We'll let you know whether there are various trolling speeds, you know what's a speed sensitive device. You know, we've been doing this since the early 90s, and we really have never experienced much in the way of competition from other people doing this, and I think the reason for it is it's time consuming and it's very difficult to do. Very hard on the diver to do these depths over and over and over repeatedly, and it's also just super time consuming. By the time we pass the diver and make a big circle and come around and line up to make another pass past the diver, we've eaten up an enormous amount of time. We can only do a handful of lures in any given day, and conditions have to be perfect. We can only test when it's calm out. If it's windy, we simply can't do it, and so logistically, it's a very difficult process, and it's taken us literally decades to get to where we are now. But thankfully, we've accomplished an enormous amount of data over that time span. So if you're looking to find out how deep your lures go, chances are we've tested it. And if we haven't tested it, let us know, because we'd be willing to do that as well. You know, the other thing that we're proud of at Precision Trolling is that we consider ourselves to be trendsetters. For example, we were the first people to popularize the idea of calibrating a line counter reel. Prior to Precision Trolling data, nobody ever thought about that. They just assumed that line counter reels just came out of the box accurate and that they were giving you accurate data. Well, we kind of refuted that information and showed people exactly how you can calibrate a line counter reel to make it as accurate as possible. You know, there's a lot of other technologies that we were the first to bring to the light of the trolling scene. For example, when Offshore Tackle came out with the snap weights, nobody knew how to fish them. They were a brand new product, and we were the ones that developed the first system for fishing snap weights. You might remember it was called the 50-50 system. Let your lure out 50 foot, put a snap weight on, let another 50 foot of line out, and then we tested that with all the different sizes of snap weights, 1/2 ounce, 3/4, 1 ounce, 1 1/2, 2, etc. And so we came up with a 50-50 system. Later on, we came out with another very popular system called the 50+2 data, which essentially is using a 2-ounce snap weight in front of a crankbait, 50 foot in front of a crankbait, to get crankbaits to go deeper. And now we're on the cusp of starting something new. It's an entirely new system. People want to go deeper, and that's the one thing we hear from our fishermen friends and the people that follow our app, is that they want to go deeper, deeper, deeper all the time. Well, common sense would suggest if you wanted to go deeper, you could just take a larger snap weight, potentially say a 50+3, and you could use that to go deeper. But when we tested it, we discovered that the size of the 3-ounce snap weight is so large and there's so much friction, it really didn't get you much additional depth. So we started experimenting with tadpole divers. And if you're not familiar with tadpole divers, they're made by Offshore Tackle. They came on a 1, a 2, a 3, and a Magnum. And we started looking at the number 3 tadpole. It actually dives. It has a dive curve of its own. And so we rigged them so we could rig them inline, so I could put a tadpole 50 foot up the line, so a crankbait, a 3-ounce tadpole, and started testing that. And you will be amazed how deep that goes. Now, for the first time, we can get crankbaits into that 50 and 60 foot threshold, which we've never been able to do with traditional tackle before. So haven't even named this system yet, but it'll be 50 T3 or something of that nature. But trust me, you're going to hear a lot more about how to use tadpoles in combination with crankbaits to get them deeper with precision trolling data. I mean, when you think about it, there's hardly a way of fishing that's more efficient than trolling. You can put lots of lures in the water. You can control the depth of where those lures are running. You can put multiple lures, so you're stacking lines, and you literally are, what we like to say, flooding the water column with bait. So it's hard to imagine a method of fishing that's more efficient than trolling. But if you don't know where your gear is running in the water column, you are truly trolling blind, and that's the thing that we're trying to avoid. We're trying to teach people that if you learn where your gear is running in the water column, you'll be a more efficient and more successful fisherman.
Closed captioning is provided courtesy of Precision Trolling Data, the Troller's Bible. Fishing 411 TV comes to you courtesy of Offshore Tackle, Yakima Bait Company, Suzuki Marine, Jay's Sporting Goods, Smooth Move Seats, Garmin Marine, Bill Lewis Lures, Starcraft Marine, Niagara Falls USA, and Eagle Claw.